Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you all our quick update on what went down last night at the MPS Committee of the Whole meeting. Heather, how are you doing today?
Good. The sun is shining today.
It is bright. It is nice. I I'm back. I'm excited to be back and do this recap with y'all. I'm sorry if y'all enjoyed your recap with just Heather. Um,
It
that's totally understandable. I did catch it, and she was great. So thanks for covering for me, Heather.
was a lot harder to do without you, but I hope you had a good time away, had a
I
good
did.
rest.
I did. It was really nice and restoring. So I'm back. I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of thoughts on what went down last night at the school board meeting. But Heather, do you want to share?
Yeah, so just kind of thinking about the quick rundown, I would actually step us back a little bit from the committee of the whole meeting. There was a policy meeting right before the committee of the whole meeting, and we know that our policy committee's been doing some really diligent work of streamlining and naming policies that are loose or unclear, and they've been really kind of just moving through in a consistent manner for this year. But last night they brought up some things that we've been thinking about and watching really closely. They talked about site councils and the inconsistencies and the lack of good policy around site councils, because sometimes a site council is a PTA and sometimes a site council is not a PTA, and sometimes you have to get voted into one and sometimes you just can show up and be in one. And so they talked about maybe the fact that they need to create some basic policies around that if a site council is in fact the mechanism that's going to support the climate framework. They also, Director Ellison asked a question about parent fundraising, and we know that that's something we've been talking about, the inequities in some of our schools and buildings and their ability to raise $400,000 for just their building and have a foundation, and how other schools don't even have a PTA. So we're super happy to hear that that might be coming up in the policy meeting. And then that kind of also led into a conversation around kind of Director Arneson talked about the sports EDIA and how, boosters were also found to be another place where we see a lot of inequities. Then the committee of the whole started. And in the committee of the whole meeting last night, really what we heard was an update on where we are in the climate framework process. And so, for people who don't know, the climate framework is a set of 4 values that our district is going to be implementing in the fall of next year. We started to create these values with parents, students, and teachers in the early summer. I was on that initial group of parents who gave input, and now it seems like we're getting closer and closer to being able to implement these values. So that's what last night's was, an update on all of that. It was a fantastic meeting.
Awesome. And so with that, I'll share my slide of the night is this slide here that talks about not only the 4 values that the climate framework is going to be built out around, but also what are some of the strategies and the supporting actions that are taking place in order to really realize the values that Minneapolis says they're going to be focusing on and want to be true about their entire district and every building in their school, every building in every school. So, um, you know, I think this is really important to just note and see not only is like are the values being created and the framework being created, but also there are things that are being done and actions that are starting to be thought about that are going to happen that the district has already started to plan in conjunction with some of these things that already started being worked on in the CDD. And so we see all of these things kind of coming together. Um, and I think there are definitely things to be looking forward to, things to raise your voice around if there are things that are missing here. And so I just say that this is a list. I don't know if it's an exhaustive list, and I don't necessarily. I'm not saying that these are all. This represents all the things that they should be working on in order to reach some of these goals that they've been talking about. I will also say that, when we're talking about, the climate framework, what was clear last night was that individual school communities will have the opportunity to really talk about how do these things come to life in their specific schools. And so, as Heather was mentioning, um, earlier in the conversation, they had talked about, or earlier in the night at the policy committee meeting, they talked about their site council and different things like that. And so, the site council is going to be playing a big role in how, you know, this will all come to life in their specific schools, and also what is the parent engagement strategy beyond site council in order to see like how do we want our school to look and function. And so schools will have the opportunity, parents, families, school communities will have the opportunity to really build what this looks like, especially in some of our new school communities that are coming together through the CDD. So I thought that was important. But Heather, was there anything in this slide that really jumps out to you?
Yeah, so you say a slide of the night, and I zeroed in on a sentence. I have a sentence of the night. The racial incident protocol. I think, we kind of talked about the fact that like there could be, this really could be more than racial. This could be talking about LGBTQ students or special ed students. There should be a protocol or a process by which families and or students who don't see that these things are true for them, that there is a process that they can enter. And I think the fact that there is a protocol means that there is something that when parents or families or students are not seeing these four elements in their school, there's now a process. And as a parent, I have seen the lack of process end or hold up accountability many times in these conversations. So that I'm going to be watching. Like, when do we get to see that protocol? I would really like to see it. But as a person who was in the room when we tried to fit all of these things into 6 statements, that was the district's original goal, to see it come down to these 4. It's kind of an amazing thing. It was a lot of work. It's been a lot of work.
Yeah, I'd say yeah, the racial incident protocol definitely stands out to me. I know we've had different conversations in the last few weeks about a host of different things, but especially with everything going on in our community, I think yes, a racial incident protocol is important, and also we definitely need to be thinking about like how do we more generally create some level of like a hate incident protocol,
Mm-hmm.
because we know so much is happening and so many communities are under attack, and so I don't want to move us away from focusing on race, because anti-racism work is important, and I think it's important that there is a policy that is and a protocol on how we handle these types of incidences and situations that aren't just happening from student to student. I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. This isn't happening just between like a third grader and a fifth grader. Like, this is happening between students and adults. It's happening between adults and adults in our building. It's happening between parents and teachers, right? Like, so there's lots of ways that this is going to need to be interacting with our school communities. And but I also think more generally with the protocol needs to come like a strong hate policy uh,
Yes.
that is paired with all of this, because yeah, there's so many communities, so many different groups that are under attack when we talk about different racial groups, different cultural groups, religious groups. um, we saw what happened in Moorhead with the mosque that was vandalized. um, and so yeah, this is just, I think, a really important conversation, as we continue to talk about our LGBTQ students, as we talk about our students with disabilities. I think we just need to see more, and how they're being treated within this specific bullet point, but also across all of these values. So um, yeah, that's kind of my big takeaway from last night. And so with that, let's move to our do better moment and our most valuable moment. Heather, you go first, and you pick which one do we start with.
Well, I think we should start with the most valuable moment.
Okay.
I know that you have a lot to say about your do better moment.
I might save most of it for a longer video, but
Yeah.
yeah, you go ahead. What's your most valuable moment?
So my most valuable moment was, I think, the presentation itself last night. Um, you can tell that the team, that Senior Officer Moore's team has been diligently working on this process, and I think, but I really appreciated the videos that we saw. You know, that we heard directly from students, that we heard directly from parents, uh, in the format of a video. And I think, we heard from Jefferson students about the process of the fact that they would like a voice in renaming their school. They don't want their building to be named after Thomas Jefferson. And we heard them talking about different styles of voting, and we heard them talking about the process of brainstorming. And so we've heard from students of color specifically, over and over and over again, that they want to be co-creators of their school experience. And so last night we got to see that along in a video format, and we got to see parents also giving input about their children's day and what it feels like to be a parent dropping off a child. And we got to see school staff modeling non-defensive feedback taking in those videos. And so for me, my most valuable moment was that presentation. I saw a lot of things that if we could continue to do those things in buildings, we could really shift culture.
Yeah, that's great. Um, yeah, I mean, I thought it was great to hear from students and parents directly, and to have those videos. I think was powerful for sure, and I think really added to the context of the presentation. I'll say my most valuable moment was, again, I feel like this has happened very often now, but again, goes to Director Elamine, who brought up academics and like how are academics going to be a part of this conversation. I think that there is a much closer tie to what's going on and what they're planning with the climate framework and what we're seeing and how we can improve our academics than right now the district is is creating. I think there's a much stronger connection there. And I would just suggest that we continue to push the district in thinking about like, you know, academics and the climate framework are not two separate things.
Or not.
Creating a strong climate allows students to come into the building and be their full selves and learn. And I think it also goes beyond just curriculum transformation. And I know we kept pointing to that yesterday in terms of the response to those questions that Director Elamine and then a few other board members brought up after her. But I just think that we should be asking for more and demanding more in terms of thinking around like how does academics connect to our climate framework and how does academics show up in all of our conversations. And so my most valuable moment goes to Director Elamine for continuing to have this such an important focus on academics. And I know I've been the one that has given the district and the board do better moments over and over again for not talking about academics. And so I want to recognize Director Elamine for bringing us to that point and having that conversation.
She sure does consistently ask the hard questions. That's one thing we're noticing a trend in that. Well, I'll say my do better moment. I think for me, my do better moment, I'm going to kind of come back to my thing that I've been talking about really consistently over the last few weeks, is like, I loved seeing that there were standards inside of the climate framework when we talk about buildings and when we talk about the way that we want buildings to feel. But also, we know that that those standards are so far away, like what a building standard is in our district is so far away from reality that I like if we just think very specifically about some of the discrepancies and some of the things that we've seen personally for Hall School, we know that there's been some things that Laney School has been talking about. So these belief statements are valuable, and yet we don't see the any sort of standard of buildings for North Side schools that we can point to in our district and say, oh yes, this is the way we're honoring this belief statement currently, right? So that would be my do better moment.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so my do better moment, I'm not sure if this is necessarily assigned to any one individual, because I heard it was kind of the ethos of the conversation yesterday, the foundation of the conversation yesterday. Um, but the conversation was really centered around like we need the district, we need this climate framework to support us to get to the point that our families, our students, our teachers, our staff are experiencing kindness in our building. And I think that's very problematic for a lot of different reasons. One, I think kindness is such a low bar. Like if we're not already at kindness, like that is a significant problem. If our students, our parents, our families, our teachers, our staff aren't experiencing kindness in our building, like that is a significant problem. But on top of that, like that's just the entree, or that's the appetizer to the entree of the problem. I think the second problem here is as we're talking about having an anti-racist, anti, anti-racist, anti-white supremacist um, community and culture within our buildings, like kindness can't be the thing we settle this around because kindness is the cousin of comfort. And if what we're doing is we're creating this right to comfort for everybody. And so I as a parent can come in heated about something that my student experienced in a building. And I can come in heated, I can communicate it in a very harsh way and whatever, and then I wouldn't be considered kind. And so then maybe my concern, my issue would not be addressed because it wasn't kind. And people would take issue with the way that I expressed myself and my frustration around what happened to my child rather than what actually happened to my child, right? And so we see that happen over and over and over again already in Minneapolis public schools. And so, and not even just in Minneapolis public schools, in Minneapolis generally, right? Like there's so much tone policing that takes place. There's so much, people always react to, or people want to hold people accountable for the reaction to the problem as opposed to the actual problem itself. And so I just think that kindness cannot be the thing that we're centering this around. Like it can be respect, it can be, people are seen, people are heard, but kindness can't be the thing. I think we've seen time and time again out, especially as our community has been going through so many things and we've seen so many protests. Not all the protests have been kind, right? But I think we've all appreciated them. And I think, I don't think the targets of the protests, especially, wouldn't say that they've experienced kindness, but they have experienced accountability. And so I think that's something that we really need to really hold tension around is like kindness is a really subjective thing, first of all, but also I think honors whiteness, honors a right to comfort, honors people's, safe spaces when really like we need to push, we need to make people uncomfortable because like sitting in comfort then just allows us to settle into whatever it is we're doing right now, which is not working. So that's my do better moment is like, let's reevaluate kindness as the goal here.
Yeah, and what word would you wish that they would have used last night instead?
I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about it. I mean, I think accountability is a strong word. I think respect is an important word. I'm not necessarily sure what it is. Um, but I think kindness, I think people should experience kindness. I don't want to say that I'm anti-kindness. I think though that like kindness is a very weird, very problematic goal to be shooting for. Um, And I think like a byproduct of everything that's happening, like on the way to whatever it is we're striving for, kindness should be like happening, but kindness can't be the thing that we're we're shooting for here. So
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's our recap. It's a complicated conversation. I think it's great that our district is working on having a structure so that families can have something to point to specifically. And I think that it shows a lot of work and more work to do to implement it. That's for sure. We can see that even just in this part of the conversation. But thanks for joining us so much for this recap, and we will talk to you all soon.
good to be back. Thanks, Heather.
Bye.